All right, now we imagine that the credits have just finished rolling, and the lights have come up now a little bit in the theater, the imaginary theater, and I step forward and take a microphone from the guy on the side, and it's not a very good microphone because the audio systems are never very good in theaters for this kind of Q&A thing, but I've got it, and I would say to everyone who just watched the movie, wow, right? Yeah. Uh, thanks. Thanks so much for coming out tonight, or tuning in, as we would say, for the film. And I really hope you enjoyed it. We're thrilled that you participated in watching it tonight. HOSEA, I am Real Spirituality Co-Director Elijah Davidson. I have been helping run Real Spirituality here at Fuller Seminary for a while now, about a decade or so, and it's actually pretty rare that we've screened a film that has such obvious kind of biblical connections. We tend to screen other kinds of films at Fuller, and not that there's anything wrong with biblical films, but we tend to look pretty widely to find theological weight in films. We're kind of under the conviction that God is everywhere and in all kinds of movies. But we are really thrilled to have been able to screen HOSEA tonight. And for a lot of reasons. One, we just love it. I think it's pretty great. Avril, who you'll meet in a moment here, is an alum and friend, and she helped produce the film. So that was also always a treat when we get to feature a film by someone who is kind of one of our own. Yeah, so it's as you saw, great movie, and glad to be here. So I am here now with some of the filmmaking team here. Once again, you have to imagine a row of chairs here, and I would introduce each one. They would walk up and sit down. But I'm not going to do that exactly. And so by way of bio here, we have Suzanne Watson, who produced the film. And now I'm reading off of Suzanne's bio on her website. Says that Suzanne began her career in the live special events world, where she planned and produced major events all over the United States. She and Ryan have traveled to multiple festivals with their films, and most recently returned to the Napa Valley Film Festival with their feature HOSEA, which you just saw. Which won the jury award for Best Verge Performance Recognition. Says here that she is the ultimate project manager, and project managers are really, really important. And when she's not working as a film producer, she is often lending her time and expertise in helping raise funds and awareness for orphan advocacy, disadvantaged youth, education, and faith-related causes. So Suzanne, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you.
Also, we have Ryan Daniel Dobson, who both wrote and directed the film you just watched. Ryan is a filmmaker based in LA, also the founder of Revived Transformed Vintage Clothing, and the producer and writer of a narrative podcast called The Thicket, which sounds pretty interesting to me. I'll have to check that out after we're done here. After studying theology in college, Ryan turned his attention to the entertainment industry with a focus on marrying theological and philosophical concepts to powerful visual storytelling. In addition to HOSEA, he has written and directed several award-winning short films featured at festivals around the world. And if you're having seen HOSEA, I can say that both those bios seem true to me. So good job with the bios.
Yeah, thanks for having us.
Yeah, and then finally,
it feels empty without the raucous applause, right? That I'm sure
it does.
accompany each.
Yeah, you also have to imagine that.
Okay.
A lot of imagining going on here. And then finally, I have somewhere here, Ruth sent me a bio for Avril. So here's what I have on Avril. Avril Speaks has over 20 years of experience as a filmmaker, which include credits as producer, writer, director, and editor. She made her directorial debut in 1999 with her first feature film, The Round Table, and then later went on to complete the award-winning feature film, Sophisticated Romance. Recently, I would say most recently, but I don't think that's probably exactly true. Avril produced the film Jen, which you may have hopefully seen, which premiered in the narrative competition at South by Southwest in 2018 and won a special jury recognition for writing. She also produced several films, including the one you just watched, and the South African drama African America, which also releases this fall. I would also say that Avril is one of the most amazing people that I know, and I'm constantly amazed that she's my friend. But that's
yeah. I feel the same way. I love it.
So, to start the conversation about the film that we just watched, now that the intros are out of the way, the entire time I was watching HOSEA, I was thinking about a line from a song that I love. Are y'all familiar with the musician Rich Mullins? Y'all know Rich Mullins? No? Yeah.
You just made me really nervous.
Oh, no. No. So Rich had this song called Jacob and Two Women. And it's a little storytelling song about Jacob and Leah and Rachel. And he starts the song out by saying, Jacob, he loved Rachel, and Rachel, she loved him, and Leah was just there for dramatic effect. And I've always loved that song because it when I first heard it, it changed the way that I read the Bible. It made me think a little bit more about some of these characters I took for granted a lot of times, and how many of them they're there and they're very important to the stories, but they're often not given their due in the story itself. And there's often not a lot of care given to their perspective. Some of them have voices. Your film, HOSEA, which is a retelling of the biblical story, kind of reimagining of the biblical story, definitely gives voice to someone who, in a lot of ways, is kind of a prop in somebody else's story in the Bible, and Gomer in the biblical story. And I just thought I'd start by saying, why tell Gomer's story? What prompted you to do this story? I guess it's mostly a question starting out with for Ryan, but the rest of you as well, because I know a film is everyone's work. So,
well, and I would say I can tell my version of that, but I think all three of us have very similar journeys that might start in slightly different places, but it's largely the same story. For me, it was early on going to college and studying theology. I went to a Nazarene school in Oklahoma, and being challenged, as many of us are when we enter that space and start to approach our faith through an academic lens and realize some of the flaws in the structures that we used to support that faith. I remember taking a New Testament class, being introduced to the idea of the search of the historical Jesus, and my New Testament professor saying, we don't really think about who this man was walking the dusty streets. Maybe he walked with a limp, maybe he was bald. And I just remember having my mind blown by the idea that Jesus could have been bald. Still to this day, trying to kind of reconcile that one. But I then took that with me. I hung on to that one, became so fascinated by it that I then would take it into these obligatory chapels we had to go to. And I remember hearing a sermon inside one of those chapels about the book of HOSEA, told in a way that is very similar to the way we've all heard it told so many times before. And hearing this preacher talk about Gomer, not as though she were a person, a human being with a context, but really as though she's, to your point, just a prop, so that we can kind of get to the moral of the story. And I remember for the first time going, the things that he's saying she did don't make sense. The idea that the portrayal that HOSEA must have been a perfectly loving husband. He had to have been, right? Because he represents God. And that she lived in a loving home and had 3 beautiful children and everything was wonderful. And that she would leave that to go pursue selling her body for sex those aren't the steps that a person takes. There has to be a different context for those decisions. So I think I started to become that started to just mull around in the back of my brain. And I know Suzanne was having similar experiences specifically with HOSEA. Avril was having those experiences with sacred stories in general. But I think they can both tell you about those experiences for them. Suzanne, you want to go?
Sure. Yeah, I grew up in the church, and I want to say it was, towards the end of high school or maybe beginning of college. Someone in my youth group gave me Francine Rivers' Redeeming Love. So that was one of my first introductions to Hosea. And I just remember after reading that, I thought, like, what would this look like if it was a movie and it was modern day and it was from her point of view and it was just like actual real people? Like, what would that actually look like? And so that was sort of my first thought, just because, growing up, a lot of the stories, like Ryan's saying, they're very like sanitized versions of them, and you just touch on like the theme of love and redemption. And you don't really get into the nitty gritty of who these people were or who they are, and especially the female characters. And so, cut to years later, I'm living in LA and I'm in a small group through our church, like a couple small group that Ryan's actually in, or we were in years ago and at the time. And I mentioned this to a mutual friend of ours in the same group, that I really wanted to like consider doing this story. I really wanted to consider making a movie, producing a movie like this. And she's like, you need to talk to Ryan. He's got the same idea. And so that's really where this project started, was us just meeting at a coffee shop at 6 a.m. here in LA. And he had his note card at Pete's. And I think Brentwood, because we were just coming from different directions, and that was the middle road for us. And that's where it began. And then a few years later, the script was developed and we really needed a third person. And that is where Avril came in.
Yeah, it's so interesting that you started off with that Rich Mullins song, because like that story of Jacob and Rachel is like, it's like triggering for me, because I've always hated that story so much, because it's always preached like, isn't this a wonderful thing? Like Jacob did this thing for Rachel and he worked so hard to like have her. And and the thing about it that always annoyed me about that story was Leah. I'm like, why did this woman for all of these years is like trying to get his attention, and I'm gonna have these kids and maybe now he'll love me, maybe, like those words like used to haunt me. Like I used to just be like, I don't understand why we think this story is so great. And so that being said, I think there are a lot of stories in the Bible that challenge me in that way. Like we preach it one way, but I'm always thinking like, but what about this other thing? And part of that was kind of a motivation for me to go to Fuller and to study in the theology and film department, because, as a filmmaker, I kind of have been wrestling for a long time with this idea about, how do we tell stories as believers, and, should we be telling stories out of the Bible? And if we do, what stories are we telling? And, kind of what lens are we telling that from? And so part of my going to Fuller was just to kind of work through some of that. And I will say that during my time at Fuller, I kind of immersed myself in the academic part of it. It wasn't until the end of my time there that I kind of started coming back to myself from a production end and wanting to get back into production. And so, I finished the program there. I did Gin, which also kind of deals with some religious themes in it as well. And right about the time that I finished production on Gin I was introduced to Ryan through another Fuller alum, Samantha Curley. She introduced us and told me about this film. And for me, it was a great sort of marriage, like coming out of a program where I'm, just intense on thinking about a lot of these themes in terms of how we practically engage with a text and put it on a screen in order for people to be able to digest it in some kind of way and interact with it. This film was kind of like a perfect way to do that. And I loved the script, and I loved the fact that it was from the perspective of Gomer's perspective, for that same reason that I felt so enraged by the omission of Leah. I mean, Leah's there, but we don't really know her backstory or know like how she felt about that whole situation. So I kind of felt like this was an opportunity to kind of delve into a character that's often forgotten in the same way. So
Elijah, can I add one other thought about your comment about it? The idea of these characters being props so that we can kind of arrive at the point we want to get to. in the story of Hosea and Gomer, I think part of the significant issue with that is that Gomer is the one who's supposed to, in this allegory, represent Israel, but also represent humanity, right?
Yeah.
And to then take that character and flatten that person down to two dimensions where they're really just kind of a stand-in for like the human appetite, like the Freudian id or sinfulness, then that two dimension, then when we try and reapply it to our three-dimensional lives that are complex and complicated, there's all kinds of misinterpretations that happen there, or the translation doesn't go well, basically. And I think that's how we end up in places like texts like Hosea, holding up structures of patriarchy, or being used to justify spousal abuse, or supporting systems of kind of marital ownership and honor shame society, because we're then taking that flat character and being like, see, this is what marriage is supposed to be like. That causes pain and destruction in people's lives because we utilize people in the story that way.
Yeah, no, it's so true. And I think it points to like something that a really well told story, like your film, like y'all's film, can do, is that it when storytellers take the characters and the narrative seriously, it doesn't allow us to flatten anything out. Like you see all the complicatedness of it all, and it doesn't. A good story is kind of messy and complicated, and it's hard to take it and use it for ill purposes. It's hard to use for any purposes at all. Like it's kind of its own thing with its own life, and all we can do is kind of respond to it, I think. One thing I really loved, to get to the perspective piece there, is in your film, she is so well characterized, and such a complicated person, like from the get-go, and what that did for me is that I was interested in her, how she would respond in certain situations, what she was about and why and whatnot. It also held me a little bit distant from her in a really good way. It made me approach her as an actual person, not someone who I could so easily identify with. So at the end of the film, the very, very, very end of the film, like when they're having the conversation on the steps, and you do the turn there where she says, I can't come up to you, you have to come down to me. Like that was such a snap moment for me, where it's almost like I realized again, oh yeah, this is the Hosea story. And in that story, I'm Gomer, like that's who I'm supposed to be identifying with in that story, and recognizing that I'm not God. I'm not Hosea. I'm not God in this story. I'm this other person. And because I was so invested in who she was, because she was so well put together, and interesting, and like fully developed, I was a little bit apart from her, and then it snapped me back in at the very end. It was really powerful. So well done. Good job doing that.
That's a huge compliment.
Yeah.
Would you found it easier to more quickly empathize with her if we'd had her save a cat somewhere in like the first 10 minutes, like just something really simple?
There are ways that like a worse film would have been reminding me all the time that, hey, in this story, this is you, like remember who to identify with. And y'all didn't do that. You had enough respect for your audience and respect for your story and respect for the characters to let her be, and then to really, like, at the very end there, bring it when you needed to. So excellent.
One of the tasks in the course of creating the story, that all three of us engaged in, was listening to the stories of women who've been through these kinds of circumstances. And there's a great deal of responsibility that comes with even attempting to kind of dip your toe into this kind of story. So, I think it's important to acknowledge that what we've put on screen here does not represent all stories. So it's easy to sort of say like, oh, well, everyone who's ever been trafficked or been a prostitute or been a sex worker also suffered sexual abuse as a child or struggles with substance abuse. That is, not true. but we are telling a version of a story that we heard many times. And the task there of making Kate or Gomer three-dimensional, of asking people to reimagine what they've thought of this character as, is to show them the experiences that brought them to where they are and why they have the identity that they do. I think of early on through an organization here in LA that works with trafficked victims, we were privy to a modern day situation that was almost uncanny. It was a husband and wife. There were 3 kids in the family. And the wife in the situation really found herself kind of waxing and waning between wanting to be in this home, but also not feeling like she belonged. And part of hearing that story was recognizing that the identity that she had developed through a system of abuse and commodification by the men in her life was so deeply ingrained that you can't just walk in, someone can't just walk into her and be like, hey, be better, like magically be better. And so that it became then important in the movie to help the audience grapple with what a character like Kate would go through to arrive at these spaces that we understand her character making those decisions as we follow the biblical story.
That's good. That was you've kind of led into my next little bit of questioning here, which is getting away from the biblical story a little bit into the real world part of it, because it is a contemporary story. I was going to ask about that, about the kind of research you did on people who actually would kind of be like Kate in our world. I was also curious about filming in Oklahoma City and what it was like to film there. Not a typical place that we see a lot of movies filmed, and it was a lot of fun to see Oklahoma City in the movie as well. Yeah, what were some of the other kind of real world challenges and fun things you discovered along the way that kind of helped you bring the story to life in the world that we recognize?
It was cold, Elijah. Tell him, Suzanne.
Yeah.
Tell him how cold it was.
It was so cold. No, so Oklahoma City, you write what you know. And I'm from Oklahoma. And Ryan lived in Oklahoma for a while. That's where his wife is from, is Oklahoma City.
Oh,
and
fun.
so
I'm from North Texas.
Oh, you are?
Yeah, like in Gainesville, Texas, right across the border on I-35. So the
Yeah.
red dirt was very familiar to me.
Right.
Yeah.
And so
Yeah.
that was really important. Like early on, Ryan really wanted to set this in Oklahoma City because that's a city that he knew and that we don't see a lot in movies, right? Yeah. And it's funny because, halfway through this, or when we got closer to filming, I really, for selfish reasons, just wanted to stay in LA. I was like, this will be easier for me. My family's here. And now I'm realizing on this side of it, I'm really glad we didn't, because there's a lot of distractions at the house. But he really fought to film there. And then when we went and did our tech scout and just all the scout, I mean, there's just no question that's where we were supposed to be. But because of the time of year that we filmed, which was in February, which is cold, and Oklahoma has, because if you're from North Texas, it's just the weather can be just one day. There was one scene we shot, and it really was one morning in the 70s, and then like a gush of wind came, and I had to go to my car and but most of that shoot was very cold. And when you're watching this movie, it does not do it justice. Like if you can see their breath, but like Donovan, when he's out there, getting the paint, the red dirt, it was, really cold that day. We were in this house. The house that we used as his home was really a condemned house. There was no electricity. It's probably torn. I don't even think it was safe to be there, honestly.
It wasn't torn down. It just fell over when we left.
Well, there was one room we couldn't be in. There was one room, like, don't go in that room because like we think the whole thing could cave in.
The roof is on a slant. It's like caving in.
Yeah. Later on, I was like, I don't think we should have been there at all. That was actually pretty dangerous potentially. Thank you that nothing happened, but it was cold and there were a lot of challenges with the weather, honestly.
Oklahoma's a place. Go ahead, Avril.
I feel like we went through every season, like in that period of 3 weeks that we were there. Because like you said, 70-some degrees on day one of filming. And then it just like the temperature just plummeted like within the same day. And then the next day we had an ice storm. We had a snowstorm. There was an earthquake. Like we like went through every like,
y'all are making me homesick.
Oh wait, do you guys remember Josh, the guy who plays Donovan? I forgot about this. It was like we were in the hotel, and I guess it was noon on a Saturday or something, and I forget.
Oh, and
they test every Saturday at noon. They do the tornado sirens just as a test. He didn't know that, and I guess he like walked out. He walked out in his towel. Had just taken a shower, and he's like, "What's going on? Like, is this what's happening? Is this the end?" And everyone's just like, "It's tornado siren." You know, he's like, "I'm a California boy. We don't this just. I've never experienced this before."
Totally forgot about that.
I totally forgot. So just know about that.
I should probably answer why we tortured ourselves like this. Suzanne mentioned earlier that the visuals of Oklahoma, I think, were very important. People often talk about like, oh, LA can double as anything. If you're shooting against a wall, you can tell them you're in London. So, having the big sky of Oklahoma, having the openness, the city also moves very quickly in terms of development. And so there's decrepit, dilapidated neighborhoods right next to affluent ones, which is a very unique aspect of the way the city looks. So I was interested in it from an artistic standpoint, the mud, the red clay, obviously, which is deeply connected to the identity issues that I was talking about earlier of scarring and being marked and things that we feel like we can't wash off. But there are other, when thinking about the historical context of the book of Hosea and the way that the morality of the time was really closely linked to political religiosity that's kind of baked into society, we wanted to set it in the Bible Belt so that some of those same societal pressures would be true, that Kate could be a person who walks into a room at a party and would feel like people whispering about her are judging her, that maybe in a more progressive place, those same pressures might not feel as present. And, Oklahoma is also a place that much like LA with the port here, Oklahoma is a junction of some important highways, and there actually is quite a bit of trafficking that moves through there. So it felt like the confluence of a lot of different themes that we had to keep fighting for, and I'm super thankful we shot there.
That's great.
Yeah.
And Avril, I think you're doing another film there. Is that right?
Yeah, it's so funny.
Liked it so much.
I loved it so much. Yeah, Hosea was the first time I had ever been to Oklahoma. I had never been there before, and was, I was kind of, when I came on the project and they said we're going to shoot in Oklahoma, and I was like, really? Like, do we have to? Like, just because I was like, I just feel like we can shoot this in LA, or in some part of LA on the outskirts or something like that, in front of a wall, like when I say, but we did a scout, and it's like, as soon as we got off the plane and we started driving through, and I started seeing the landscape, like the red dirt and everything, it was like, okay, I get it now. Like, this is where it has to be. And yeah, we shot that. We were there for a couple of months, I think. And it was great. The people were great. Our crew was great. Just, they kind of have a great infrastructure there for filming. I think Oklahoma is kind of like a little, best kept secret, when it comes to production. The food was great. So yeah, everything was great, to the point that, yeah, I started working on another project, and we were looking for a place that could double as Dallas, actually. And I said, well, how about Oklahoma?
Yeah.
And so we ended up taking that film there too.
That's very cool.
Yeah.
Yeah. It does, for all the reasons y'all have said it. It works really well for the story. Being from that area of the country as well, that it is true that you can be at a, the divides are not very big between like class areas in town. You can very quickly get between places, get between areas. So I thought it was great metaphor too for her journey too, in the worlds that she was crossing through. You're just kind of always there.
It felt just profound. There was, I don't have to go fully into the story, but early on in the scripting process, my young son, who at the time was an infant, wouldn't sleep, and I had to get up early in the morning and drive around town. We were there visiting for the holidays. And I drove through an area of Oklahoma City called Classen Tenpen, which is bordered by Classen Boulevard, 10th, and Pennsylvania. And it's this very rundown neighborhood, but on Classen, right across the street, is an area called Heritage Hills, which is the affluent old oil money of Oklahoma City. These big, beautiful brick homes that stuff is just right next to each other. And I knew that that was a component of the script that I wanted to maintain, which is this Henry HOSEA character from a prophetic priest class, you know, an affluent society, and the Gomer Kate character being from the class in Tenpen. And what really sold it was running right through the center of class in Tenpen is a street called Black Welder Boulevard. I have a friend in Oklahoma City who worked as an undercover cop on a sting that busted John's, and Black Welder Boulevard was the boulevard where most of those interactions were going on in Oklahoma City. So it felt too true to life. It felt so, it was so clear that it was like, well, I have to fight for this. This is where it's meant to be.
Yeah, it's great. It's a good fight. Worked out well. So let's talk a little bit about the cast of the film, because I mean, across the board, I loved everybody in the movie. And talk a little bit about how you found those actors and whatnot. They're, I mean, all just great. So, yeah.
Suzanne, why don't you tell about Camille's audition?
Yeah, so with Camille, we were auditioning that role, and we saw a bunch of girls, and a lot of the girls that came in sort of dressed like they, you know, Julia Roberts, right, from Pretty Woman. We're like, okay. Camille
Fishnet.
Yeah, fishnet. And it just didn't seem, I don't know. She came in, and just the minute she walked in and like her sweatshirt and jeans and Converse or whatever she was wearing, it's kind of like she like came in and then she had someplace else to go, you know? She just sort of like in and out. But she just came in and she was Kate, you know? So the second she walked in, before she even spoke, I was like, please be good, because you are I mean, she's exactly what I pictured for this role. So when she auditioned and we're like, this is it. This is Kate. You just knew, like, it was, and luckily she was, and she was great. I mean, she was such a pro, and, you know, just the perfect person for this role. I'm just really so happy with her performance.
I feel like she was one of the last people to come in, I think. And we were like,
I know, we were like so nervous. We're like, what are we gonna do? We're shooting in like 2 weeks and we don't have our main character. Yeah, and then she walked in. So that's how we got Kate. I got Camille.
Yeah. And then Avi, I think came through our casting director as well. But he was in New York, I believe. So we just got like a tape. We got a tape of him. You know, his name was on a list, and we thought, oh, this audition was really good. Like, let's get on a call with him. And, you know, we do this, like, it's a Skype. We did a Skype with him in New York, and he's like, well, yeah, I'm getting ready to get on a plane and go to France. Like, I'm going to go live in France and bake bread. And we were like, wait, what? What? Like, he wanted to learn French. And he's that type of, when you meet him, he's that type of person that he's just like, I wanted to learn French, and the best way to do it is just to go to France and immerse myself in the culture. So he was like gonna go to a baking school or something and learn French. And we're like, no, you can't do that. You have to do it.
Like, what about being an architect and moving to Oklahoma City? What do you think about that?
That's part of what felt so right to me about it, is a person who has an idealism in them, who then goes, the thing that makes the most sense is for me to fly to France and immerse myself in baking school, is also a person who would be idealistic enough to be like, I believe in this young love, like, let's do this, you know, that kind of tenacity for something. And then Josh, I mean, we definitely consider Josh Pence, who plays Donovan, as one of the leads. Josh is a person that Suzanne and I have known for many years. He actually is not who was originally cast to play that role, but that actor had to step out for another reason. And years before that, I had been at a festival with Josh. We were there with completely different projects, and just over lunch told him about HOSEA. And so through a friend, reconnected with him, and he typically plays buttoned up roles. So this was something that it was a new venture for him, certainly something we believed he could do. But, you know, now, as you all have seen, he just is, his performance is incredible. It's the complexity of scenes like the bathtub scene, when he goes from this rage, this frustration and violence, to almost being overcome by embarrassment with his actions. That every time I watch the film, I'm taken with how solid that performance is. I'm so proud of him.
You know what I forgot about Josh too was that he didn't audition for the role. Like, we just offered it to him. And so I don't know, Avril, if you remember this, that we were kind of like, we don't even know. I hope he's good at, we don't even know what he's going to do with the character, because the Donovan character really could go a few different ways, you know? And when he walked on set that first day in his wardrobe, and he was so involved in this character. He designed all the tattoos that he's got, you know, his character has. He just was Donovan. The second he walked on that set, that very first day, I was like, oh, thank you. You know, this is Donovan. And the first scene we saw, we're like, okay, good. I forgot about that.
Well, I mean, it all worked out, and they're all great, and they all, you know, they all bring. There is such like nuance to all their characters. None of them end up being like, none of them are easy, you know. And even the idealism that Avi has is it's complicated. It makes it all pretty complicated. Yeah, so great. Okay, I have one more question before we're done, because it's something I've been kind of noodling over since I watched the film the other day, and I'm curious. There's not a character in the film named HOSEA, right? I didn't miss one somewhere. So I'm
we should have
curious.
given the taxi driver that name. Man, dang it! Is it too late to change it?
So I am curious, beyond the reference to the book, why you went with that title for the film? Just curious.
We debated for so long, so long, this question, and I think we did the right thing, as much as there is a right thing. Mm-hmm. We've had the experience of screening the film in several different places, and it's interesting how I think people of all different viewpoints and worldviews can enjoy the film, which is definitely a goal from the beginning. Yeah. Not to take a chunk of scripture and use it to proselytize anyone, just to tell the story, as you were mentioning earlier, Elijah. But with people who understand the biblical reference, they are having another layer of experience watching the film that people who don't understand the biblical context aren't. Mm-hmm. And that's fine, but we didn't want to risk that other layer could be lost. And the example that I've told, that Avril and Suzanne and I have talked about several times before, is the idea that, you know, someone can watch something like 10 Things I Hate About You, and then months and months later at a cocktail party, someone tells them like, oh, did you know that's based on a Shakespeare play? And it's just trivia. Like, it's an interesting thing to stick in your back pocket, but it's not central how you experience the story. If we're going to invite people into a conversation about things like patriarchy, identity, hermeneutics, that we don't want to release them from the conversation the film's trying to have. And so we stuck with that title to make sure that people knew that we were wanting to engage in that kind of conversation.
That's great. I love that. It works. It totally works. So
good.
Yeah. I don't have to, if I write it, I usually don't review the films that we screen, but if I wrote a review of this, I won't have to explain to people that it's based on the thing. So you saved me a sentence, if nothing else.
There you go.
And I appreciate that. Well, this was really great. Thank you all so much again, both for sharing the film with us and for talking with us about it. We're screening this on October 1st. When is it like released out for real?
Friday, the 25th.
Friday.
Yeah.
Okay. Oh, awesome.
Yes.
So it'll be already out when we are screening it. So tell your friends.
Please.
Yeah.
Yes, please. Please.
And they can watch it where and how?
Yes, they can watch it on iTunes, so Apple TV, on Amazon Prime Video, and on Google Play.
Perfect. All the
and later
places.
on Vudu. Vudu will be available also a few weeks later. Yeah.
Okay. Great. Well, once again, thank you all so much, and have a great evening, everybody.
Awesome. Thank you for having us.
Thanks, Elijah.